Civilized Society.
Back with yet another analysis of Fight Club. Fight Club is a movie that I stand by as a piece of American art. I will defend it into my American grave. I think it's underappreciated now. And I think it's ever more prescient. And we're going to look at one of the most prescient parts, I think, which is the way Fight Club explores group dynamics and the psychology of what makes groups so attractive to people, particularly people that are struggling with their individuality. So we're going to go through that. We're going to go a little bit through destruction and that line in the movie that everybody remembers. I wanted to destroy something beautiful. When Edward Norton beats the shit out of Jared Leto. Leto, doesn't matter. He doesn't have a face left in Fight Club. That's what matters. We're going to go through that. And you got a little poem in there. We'll look at your little poem, Justin. And then we'll wrap it up with a surprise ending, because everything we do in this podcast is an absolute surprise.
That's right. It's going to be great. I'll tell you what isn't a surprise, the word of the podcast. People know it, people love it, people rely on it. And I'm here to give it to you. The word of the podcast today is going to be freedom. I think it's an important word. I think it's a word that, given the circumstance of what's going on in the world, within our own country, within the country of Cuba, as you pronounce it.
That's right.
Thank you.
Cuba.
Yeah. That's important to say. So Old English, freedom. It's kind of spelled the same. It's got a little O in there, though. Power of self-determination, state of free will, emancipation from slavery, deliverance, see free, the adjective, plus D-O-M. We all know what freedom means, right? Or do we? I'm not sure.
We don't.
Okay, well, I'm trying to tell you what it is. So.
Oh, okay, as long as you're going to do that. If not, then I need to step in.
No, I will. And what I thought was really interesting about this is that etymonline.com, will also sometimes have quotations of use from a word in history to give you an idea from it. And then at the final one at the bottom, it's not a quotation actually, says freedom fighter, attested by 1903, originally with reference to Cuba. I thought that was what do you call it? The Carl Jung thing where synchronicity. Am I right?
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Yeah, because this podcast episode is probably going to come out like in a month. And who knows where Cuba will be by that time. Probably not in a great place. That's something that people don't, God bless them. God bless all the people that look at Cuba right now. It's just a bloody, brutal, disastrous example of this inherent desire in the human being for the most basic freedoms. Now that's a complicated thing to say, the inherent desire for freedom, because then what this movie argues is that actually there is also in some cases an inherent desire for submission. And group submission is one of the things I think that is a disturbingly growing trend in the United States, which is a country that's supposed to be the exemplar for freedom, and particularly individual freedom. So, Cuba, who knows where it'll be, because that's not a situation that it's very simple. Because even when you fight for freedom and you have a revolution, people have to remember that the regime that is brutalizing people now was born of a revolution. So there is no guarantee that a revolution ends in some type of happy, democracy where everything is resolved. On the contrary, a revolution can just give way to something even more brutal, which is what the original Cuban Revolution gave way to. So let's get into group dynamics in Fight Club, because one of the things that you see in Fight Club is the way that Edward Norton's character starts to recruit, or Brad Pitt, whatever, they're the same character, They start to recruit people into Fight Club first, but then Fight Club starts to grow into something a little more serious than just people taking some time out of work to, fight with each other. Fight Club starts to become political. They start to actually organize and enact destructive acts throughout society. And I think the most important thing to start with is the breeding ground of this desire for people to align themselves with a group, and especially one that may be have destructive aims. So something that is interesting of that is that there was like some survey that came out recently saying that Americans have less friends than I guess ever before or something like that. Than for a while, Americans don't have a lot of friends anymore, and I can attest to that because I have my friends and they're good because we have our we know how to communicate with each other and be normal and get along on the things that we like and that we enjoy, and we share between each other, and then not take so much interest in the things that we don't agree on or that we don't have interests on that are mutual. But as people become more isolated in a society, they become more vulnerable to the pull of groups that offer that kind of escape from alienation. But there's always a price. That's what people don't understand, is that sure, ally yourself with a group, but there is a price for entering that group. And very often it's your freedom.
Wait, ally yourself to a group? Is that what you just said?
Like, ally yourself, like join a group.
Why?
I don't agree. I don't think you should. But I mean, sure, go ahead and do it. But I'm just saying, if you're going to do that, don't be so naive as to be like, oh, it's on my terms. It's never on your terms. It's on the group's terms. That's how those things work. I mean, if it was always on other people's terms as they entered the group wouldn't survive. And the group's biggest interest is always the survival of the group, whether it be political, religious, whatever it is. I mean, a group is not something comprised of individuals. It's something comprised of individuals that rescind some of their individuality to uphold and maintain the group. That's the price of a group. That's why I'm not a fan of groups, because I don't want to pay admittance to anything. Not if it's gonna cost me some kind of integrity or really any type of freedom. I don't care. I'd rather be alone. But that's me. I am particularly comfortable with being more alone than I should be. Some people are not.
Well, we're going to have a hard time taking different sides on this issue, because I would suggest that I probably shifted the polling data on that by just the amount of friends that I've lost, and I didn't even start out with a giant pool, So I just,
there's something weird there. People are just losing friends, and I think a lot of it has to do with politics. People just don't have that sense of that we once did, which is like, yeah, my friend. I mean, you used to be able to be friends with completely different political groups, and it was like, oh, I don't agree with them, but we just stay away from that topic. Now
I have a different theory.
You need to have that sense of, oh, we agree on this, or else we cannot be friends, type of thing.
My different theory was that that since a lot of the political turmoil particularly hit a high point during the pandemic, that there's probably that essentially what people did was use political differences as an excuse to cut down their connections with people, because during a time of tribulation or chaos, when resources may become more scarce, it's probably in the interest of the individual to essentially like cut off connections with people that they feel like are, this is an extremely brutal thought actually, but this is the thought I had, that essentially what you do is that you basically take a real clear-eyed, and I'm not saying that I did this actually, I'm not saying I didn't either, but because that sounds terrible. Okay, so anyway, look, let me put it this way. One could theorize that during a time of turmoil, say caused by a pandemic or whatever, people tend to cut down on the amount of connections they have with other human beings, especially if those other human beings aren't more powerful than them or have more resources, because they know that then that connection is no longer going to serve their interest. And so, but no one wants to just say that directly. And maybe the people don't even, especially because this wasn't like the plague or something that killed half the population. So people are not even maybe consciously aware of it, but they tend to then use, so that what they do is they use an excuse, like politics, to essentially cause a rift to where they can then get rid of the person that they don't think is very useful to them. Again, not suggesting I did this. I didn't suggesting that a lot of people does. I didn't. Again, I probably didn't shift the polling data too much in this because I didn't start out with a great pool of friends. You know what? I'm going to be honest with you. I distrust anyone that has more than 5 friends. I think 5's the limit.
Yep.
You got one hand, count them on the hand, count the thumb, 5. I think that's good.
I mean, you're not wrong. That's actually a number, like, Dunbar's number, which is after 100 people, you just can't even remember names and faces anymore, really.
I call it the fist of friendship. The fist of friendship. 5 people, fist of friendship.
I don't know about that.
Is that too much?
I think you might want to rework that one.
The fist of friendship.
Well, the fist of friendship is actually, the 5 friends is a number that's set as your closest circle is 5 friends. And then besides that is just your partner. Yeah. I'm trying to tell you that, and you keep wanting to throw your little slogan in. I'm trying to tell you that there's research behind your thing before you embarrass me and make it into a caricature of an idea. But it actually does exist. There is a number, and the lowest one is 5. So... Anyway, moving on from the fist of friends. Look, I think that your theory is a little... Holy fuck. Is that like where the friends fight each other? They're like, we're not gonna be friends anymore because he voted for someone else. But the way you have to solve it is you just have to fight each other to the end, and then that's how you solve. And that's it. The fist of friends, and it's like a trophy. The one that wins the fight gets the fist of friends. They get to take it home. And then they have no friends, but they have the fist of friends, the trophy.
That's true. That's all you really
Anyway,
need.
they can talk to that. I mean, it's fine, whatever. Okay, so here's the thing with your theory. I hear it. It is truly brutal. It seems to get down to some kind of evolutionary idea, which is when things feel urgent and when it feels like you have a scarcity mindset, you're going to be less willing to entertain relationships that you feel may tax you. That may also be something, because I think people are less able to withstand disagreement and difference now, which is a funny thing because in some ways this is particularly more my generation and towards the left end of the spectrum, because for them the politics has become this religion where you define everything by that. So of course it kind of has this similar flavor to religious intolerance, which is, well, I can't be friends with Mormons, type of thing. And so I think particularly my generation has lost the ability to form healthy connections with people that don't validate them constantly, which is, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I've heard that. Did you hear this? Yeah, I heard that. Yeah, we agree. It's like this kind of desperate little shitty feedback loop. It's not a friendship, first of all, okay? If all your friendships require this kind of a constant validation and agreement, that's not a friendship. That's like a weird mutually parasitic thing you've got going on there. I don't, what if something changes? That's the thing that I always want to know, is if my friendships are truly healthy and strong, then I can tell someone tomorrow, like, hey, I've decided to vote for someone that you don't agree with. And they're not going to be like, I hope you burn in hell, bitch. Like, that's not my friend then. Like, if it's really like that, then that means your value for me was only ever in our political similarity. So you don't even value me as a person. You don't value me in all the other ways that we've got along and all the relationship that we've previously had, if you can throw it away for just that. But that goes back to what you're saying, though, that there's kind of this sense of urgency and emergency that makes people define their relationships by utility, which is, do you ally with me, or are you going to tax me by presenting ideas that I don't agree with and that I'm incapable now of tolerating?
I mean, I guess we'll just go dark, started dark, might as well keep it dark. Isn't this obviously the case that this is what people do? I mean, Wait. Okay, please.
Can we, what if we call our followers, like our patrons, what if they are the fist of friends?
No, it's that idea is trademarked. That's for Hollywood.
But trademark it for the Silver Eye. Like, let's use it.
I don't think people. I don't actually think anyone wanted. Yeah, it's for Hollywood. I'm selling that idea to Hollywood.
It's gonna have John Cena in it? That sounds like a
Man.
John Cena movie. You better be careful.
Fist of
John
friendship.
China. Okay, anyway, go on with what you were saying.
Well, no,
That is in the
yeah.
obvious case.
Oh yeah, I was gonna be a little bit extreme. I was gonna say there are films, about like where the plane crashes and then like the people are like, well, this sucks. We don't have any food, and then they cannibalize each other. So I'm just saying that like, and also there's in history like.
You're in a real brutal mood today.
No, well, okay, I'll tell you. Number one, the people don't understand is I dealt with an hour-long technical issue before this podcast. So yeah, it made me think of cannibalism.
Yeah.
No, it didn't really. But anyway, look, I'm just simply saying, and those aren't necessarily friends, those are strangers or whatever. But I mean, isn't that the exact? And I guess some people don't do that. And I hope I wouldn't do that, and I hope you wouldn't do that. And I hope everyone wouldn't do that. And we all stand around the world holding hands in a peace symbol. But the reality is that people do that, right? When they don't have food and they're just like, well, I'm going to eat that person, so that happens. That's no good. I'm saying on a very smaller
people ate each other
scale.
in the Cultural Revolution. It's important that people know that.
Yeah, John China. Why don't you do some history, John Cena?
Let's have him on the podcast so we can talk about how people ate each other in the Cultural Revolution, and not just out of starvation. This is also one of the more interesting parts of the cannibalism that occurred during Mao's Cultural Revolution, is that there were many cases where people ate other people out of a symbol of superiority and dominance.
Well, and that
Very
wouldn't actually fit in with
gnarly
my
stuff.
theory, though. Yeah, that is gnarly.
No, it doesn't.
I mean,
maybe actually.
Well,
Tangential.
anyway, point is, let's move away from cannibalism. Let's go ahead and talk
Let's
about. Did you want to talk about Twitter? It's what we usually do at this point.
Not yet. We'll get there. Now here's
Okay,
here's a nice segue into Twitter. Quote from the movie: "Why does a weaker person latch on to a stronger person?" So that's what Edward Norton's character, like as his actual character, says to Marla when he thinks that she's still with Brad Pitt's character. And so it's kind of like an allusion to like, why do you need to kind of latch on to Brad Pitt's character? Because Brad Pitt's character in Fight Club is this hyper masculine, dominant, everything that Edward Norton's kind of wimpy, submissive, sad man character isn't.
But in a way, he's saying it to himself because he's split personality. The weaker person is him that's latching on to the Tyler Durden character.
Exactly.
So
exactly. There's
that.
kind of
But
a duality there.
I answered this question in our pre-show notes, did I not? Very
if you're not looking at your notes, I cannot help you.
I said this is a tautology, which I don't know if it is. That's actually, I just tried to use a big word that made me sound smart. But it just seems obvious to me why weak people latch on to stronger people. Is it not obvious? But anyway,
go through the
perhaps it's
theory.
not.
You
Well,
had an interesting theory about it.
I said that most people don't actually do that much work to be an individual, and I don't blame them, by the way, because most people who do
it's not in our nature. First of all, let's also. I think there's a misunderstanding here that people think by default that they're individuals. You're not. That's something you have to cultivate and develop. So if you haven't been doing that, you're probably not that far along on the path to individuality. It's not something, I think that there's like an inherent core of individuality in people, but it's very covered up by the ancient, gajillion years that we've spent, not as individuals, but as group members primarily, whose survival often depended on their acceptance and their standing within the group. So this idea of, individuality and being able to bear the freedom of truly pursuing total individuality, that's a complete novelty and a new thing in human history.
I also just don't think that for the most people that it's very useful. It's probably not this sounds really, again, man.
Okay, well, there's degrees. Let's look here. There's degrees of it, okay? So I would say that you can see some type of like archetypes of the individual, if you will, like the epitome. And I would say that an excellent artist, a historically lauded artist, is the archetype of the individual, because they are one that ventures away from the group and is who makes their decisions in large part with their own system. And that's why artists tend to be always kind of on the edge of culture, which is why they make good fucking art, because they're not making shit that you've already seen, that you already know. They bring new things into the culture because they are willing to stand outside the culture. But that takes individuality. How could you do anything outside the culture, outside the group, without being an individual, without having your own system for pursuing what is outside the group?
Well, from an economic perspective, it's not even that useful. I think that artists, quote unquote, that follow the thing that most people are doing probably have a better economic well-being than the ones that try to do something new. Beyond that, also, for every artist that you hold up as this paragon of the virtue of freedom and individuality, there's 99 dead, drug-addicted artists in a gutter that you've never heard of. That's the fact. Yeah. So that's the part that I'm trying to say is that I don't know how useful, like, yeah, I think that everyone should cultivate some aspects of individuality. We want, especially in a free society, we have to have responsibility for our own thoughts as much as we can in order to make decisions. And we all know that. We don't need to go into civics lessons here. But what might be called radical individuality or radical freedom isn't something that I don't think anyone can responsibly suggest to most people. It doesn't mean any individual oughtn't to try it, but I'm just saying that. And so then the other thing I was saying is that this going back to the idea of the stronger person, the weaker person following the stronger person. What do you get? Like what actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure that makes any sense, because I was thinking that what is the stronger like, it's clear what the weaker person gets in that relationship to some degree.
Well, hold on. So the weaker person, and this is we need to be careful about the language here, because you don't want to we're conflating individuality with the strong, and that's not always true, because there is a type of strong man, authoritarian character that is a leader, but is not necessarily the paragon of individuality in its positive sense, because there is a kind of negative individuality, right? Which is, the people that, the idea that Nietzsche's Übermensch, right? That you set your own moral framework and you pursue this, that you have to be your own God in a way. That can obviously be perverted if it's not coupled with the correct virtues, I would say, which is kind of like cultivating a self-awareness, compassion, honesty. Now, if you just dedicate yourself to pursuing your own world view, your own moral framework, but you couple that with devious tendencies, so hedonism, domination, or something like that, you can see how that obviously goes into darkness. So there is important to not totally conflate the idea of strong with the individual, though the individual must be strong. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I want to agree with you because it's nice, but I also understand that as you're sitting there talking about how, like, the idea that we must completely sweep aside all of the old values of society and rebuild our own values, then all you do while you talk about that is use the values to criticize what those values shouldn't be in the individual who's making their values. Like, well, you don't want to be darkness. Well, that is a value judgment based on the previous values of the supposed person who's creating their own values that you're making. So you have to go all in or not on that one, and to say, if you're going to sweep aside all value judgments, then why are you, the success of that is kind of amoral. You can't say,
no.
Well, it is.
No.
I'm not saying that's good.
Look, no, here. Here's why I don't think that's true. I think that there is a way to actually tell if your values, because this is kind of like the postmodern critique, right? Which is, well, we all just define everything for ourselves, and that means there is no good and there is no bad. I think that's not true, because you'll see if something is good or bad by the feedback you get from the world. Are you causing pain to people? Well, perhaps your moral framework is not so good then. Are you suffering from pain? then perhaps your moral framework isn't actually working. And that's how you develop that framework, though. It's your process of developing it, because maybe, imagine, I could decide, okay, I want to become a mathematician. I would kill myself, okay? I would kill myself. It's not that being a mathematician is bad. It's bad for me. Okay? And I would see that because of how the feedback that I get from going to sit and, okay, let me try to do math. I would hate life. I would feel like I'm in a prison, while someone else can pursue that and feel wonderful and actually create wonderful things that help humankind throughout history. So it's like that process of testing things in the world and then being honest and observant enough to see, is this working? Am I making the world better? Am I making myself better? See what comes back from that.
Stop for a second and understand what you just said. Is the process are we talking about, so I just want to be clear, if we're talking about the reevaluation of all values and the Nietzsche and the Übermensch and all those concepts, if that's what we're still on, then you have to stop talking about it in the following way, which is what you're doing. Test your new values out against the framework of the world around you, is what you're saying. But when you say that, the framework of the world around you is the embodiment of those old values which you're sweeping aside. You can't say that anymore. Do you understand how radical that, when you take moral relativism to its furthest extent, you need to understand how radical it can be. I'm not endorsing it, by the way, but you're caught up in the language. It's like, you can't even conceive what it's really like, because you keep saying, oh yeah, I'm going to make my own values. Well, and then you say, and then I'm going to test it out against this world. And you're kind of calling the world objective, but it's not. Actually, what you're saying is, well, if I get negative feedback from the world because of that, then that means that you literally said then that is bad. That is a.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying, that, like, okay, for instance, like, if I write a book and people are like, this is bad, she's a witch, burn her, it means that what I've done is bad. And that's not accurate, though, because maybe my book is great, but it's the feedback is perverted by the world's values.
Kind of. That's one of the aspects of what I'm saying. That's one of the aspects of what I'm saying.
I understand what you mean, and I'm not arguing for a moral relativism, because I don't believe in that. I am actually trying to argue for the opposite. I'm trying to argue that there is a kind of like underlying system of feedback in nature, because this is real in the natural world, right? If you try something in the natural world as an animal and it doesn't work, you stop because it doesn't work. And it may even be something that brings about your injury or your death.
I agree with that.
Things
yes.
evolve.
But
So
nature
in
is
that
not
way-
value. Nature doesn't have a values. Gravity doesn't have the concept of gravity
Well, it
doesn't
does
have a right
value,
or wrong.
though, doesn't it?
No,
Think
it
about
had
Well,
no.
these are
We're gonna
words, these
get
are words.
wait.
It has a sense of what works and what doesn't.
Yes, that's different.
Okay, so maybe we don't want to use the words good and bad, but I would say if something doesn't work, then perhaps it's not conducive to life. I mean,
Yeah, I agree with that.
like, I could sit around and do crack all day and maybe I would be happy, right? I'd be enjoying crack, which is fun or something. But, like, would that work? No, I'd get sick. I wouldn't do anything else that's productive. It would be a kind of hedonistic pleasure, you know? So that's an example of how you can look at something and be like, okay, well, I like it. Yeah, well, let's see. Does it work in the world? Does it work? Does it work? No, it doesn't.
You're still stuck in this concept of like, I will do a thing that is bad for me. Number one, we've already made a mistake. We use the word bad right there. So that's already, we're outside of the idea. And then that tells me that thing is bad. That's not true. What happens if you stood in your house? I don't know why you'd stand. You could sit in your house and smoke crack all day. Whatever it is you want to do.
Yeah.
Stand, sit, whatever. Alternate. Yeah, there's science and physiology behind what will happen that will eventually degrade your system, but that requires you to have the value that your body and your physical health is better than not having that. That's the value. You have the assumption of the value. My health is good. Don't do that thing. And I understand that plays out, but the reality and the value judgment are separated.
Is there a reality where we would say it is functional for an animal to willingly harm itself? with no gain except short-term escapism. I would think that's one of these examples where you can look that the feedback you get from the world for pursuing an action shows you that this action is not going to be something that improves your standing in the world, especially in the long term. You know, and it's like, imagine an animal, okay? An animal that goes hunting in Valley B. And they keep going to Valley B. And there's nothing there. But they keep doing it, and they keep doing it, and they keep doing it. Because it's their choice, whatever. They have chosen for some reason to go into this empty valley to hunt. Well, eventually they starve because there's nothing there. So instead of taking the feedback, which an animal would do instead, an animal would say, this course of choice does not yield anything for me. And that's almost like the behavioral science theory that we are shaped in somewhat by what feedback we get from the world, right? So you're getting no reinforcement for that action. Now, if you pay attention to that, humans fuck up because we have way more ability to make choices regardless of the feedback. And so sometimes we tell ourselves, well, this is right anyway, even though all the feedback you're getting is nothing or negative. So a more functional animal, an animal that would be more likely to survive and thrive and pass on its genes, would say, this valley is empty every time I go there. I'm going to hunt in Valley A. Now I go to Valley A. Oh, it's full of little mice or whatever little animals that I eat. Positive feedback from the world. Now I have food. Now I'm doing better than what other stupid animal keeps going back to empty Valley B. That's my point, is that there is a kind of underlying, I don't want to say per se truth, but there is something true about systems of nature. It's not this kind of thing like, well, I just like Valley B. Okay, fine, but you will die. So if that's the outcome this suicidal animal is searching for, then I suppose they will get that. But is that really an animal that is very fit?
Let me...
You know, like they're not going to pass on their genes.
Let me be laconic. Nature judges you once. That's it. And that's how you can decide what the difference is if you're talking about nature or a value. Gravity, if you jump off of a building and you think that for some reason you can fly, will judge you one time. And then it will leave you alone for the rest of your life that doesn't exist because you made a mistake.
It kills you, though.
Okay.
Doesn't always happen.
Okay. Yeah. That's true.
There
Can
are
you imagine
consequences?
Yes, I understand. I understand that. What I'm trying to say is, do you not understand that the inanimate forces, I am not making the claim that inanimate forces of nature have an inherent moral value. That is not the case. Do you understand? So yeah, if you go and do something dumb over and over again because you have a dumb idea, you will die. And a lot of times you'll die doing it one time. That's separate from the moral judgment that others may make upon your behavior and the moral judgment that might be in your head if you go do an absurd thing that harms you. So I don't think that we should...
I think there's overlap.
Yes.
I think there's overlap. Because
I understand.
Look, there are things that you can do that will... look, if you kill people, no one's going to like you. Very few people are going to say, oh, that's fine. I like that.
What are you talking about? That's the most absurd statement I've ever heard in my life. Think of all of the totalitarian political people that have killed millions and millions of people, and then people run out in parades and worship them and make signs of them. So that statement on its face...
Because totalitarian people, we know how free their people are to say, I don't like this. Like, that's what people in totalitarian dictatorships do all the time. They're constantly giving feedback to their leader, because that's definitely allowed. Actually, a totalitarian dictatorship is a great example of a place where the natural feedback loop is warped and manipulated to the point that people are not allowed to give the feedback that they normally would, which is, why the fuck are you killing all the people in our town for saying shit? Yes, there are times when this is warped because the culture is perverted and the culture can become out of sync with nature, okay? And I think that's something that our culture faces now, where we have this thing of like, oh, words are dangerous. That's not true, because words and the freedom of exchanging words has allowed us to develop a culture that moves away from violence instead and uses words to settle disagreement and test out concepts instead of things that are more intense, like, just fighting to the battle to decide which idea we like more. So I think that is actually an example of a place where that feedback loop becomes distorted. there is a way. I mean, normally, if you're, shrink it down, right? Small village. One person decides, I'm going to attack this person, and he's not doing anything wrong. The tribe is going to be against that. And that's actually something that you see in monkeys, like apes or whatever, that they are not into any one ape becoming overtly aggressive like that. There's a kind of group homeostasis that's preserved there. And that's in balance with the survival of the group, right? Now, here's where we start to get into the problem of how does the individual factor into that? But I think that there is a way to say, okay, well, let me use some feedback from the world. You don't have to exist in this solipsistic universe where all you do is consult with your own inner self. You don't live in the real world then.
I'm telling you, number one, okay, you should always consult with gravity. You should always consult with the hydration of your cells. You should always consult with what we might call nature or natural law and all that, because again, it will only judge you once, or basically once, if you iterate over and over again a ridiculous activity that kills you. So we agree on that.
I don't even think that's true.
Okay, great. Well, then we'll just agree to disagree for a second.
Here, let me give you an example of why. Let me give you an example. Let me give you a very quick example of why nature doesn't only judge you once. Because I think that this is a mistake that people make a lot. I think that you're getting tiny feedback all the time from the natural world. So think of when you do something small that harms your body. So you eat food that's not so good for you, but it tastes good, whatever. You get feedback on that. A lot of times when I get takeout that it's like, I love it, whatever, and I get it for myself every now and then, but the next day I don't feel good. That's feedback. Now, it's my decision at my peril to say, yeah, but I prefer the pleasure more. And what I do is I say once a month, I'll give myself the garbage takeout that gives me a feedback that's negative. But I balance it with, okay, I enjoy it, but let me make it so that it's not causing me too much harm, right? I'm eating it every week. That's clearly I'm ignoring the feedback that the physical world, my body, is giving me by getting sick the next day. And it's not only once. It's not once. It's not like I die, boom. There's a spectrum.
I understand. Yeah, I agree with what you just said, that if you eat potato chips, it's not going to kill you. That's not what I was trying to get at. I was trying to say it in a very laconic and poetic and aphoristic way to get this idea through to you that gravity doesn't give a fuck about you one way or the other. That was my point.
I never said it doesn't.
But that's
it does.
But we were you're okay. I just want to lay this out. I want to lay this out clearly, briefly, okay? You're saying that the way in which you behave, we'll call it the natural world, will give you feedback about whether or not those behaviors are good for your organism, your physical organism. And we could include your mental well-being within that if we were a materialist, okay? And I agree with you because... No, I need to finish this point, please. Okay, because I need to make sure.
On the point, because you're characterizing my point, but I was going to just expand. I say that also, I think that it gives you feedback on your organism, but also that can be expanded out because oftentimes what is good for your organism is good for the larger world as well. So that's also the point that I make. But go on.
Good for the larger world in what manner? If we're talking about...
Think about it. Let's go to the animal example.
It doesn't matter. You don't even have to give me an example because this comes back to the point is you immediately extrapolate from this to a value judgment. Because now you're going to say it's good for everybody if I don't eat Cheetos. I understand. I get that is true. What I'm trying to... It's not about me making a judgment right now where this is right or wrong. This is about coming back to the idea, which you brought up, of the reevaluation of moral standards of the individual, and that idea of the Übermensch, which, by the way, Nietzsche said, most of you shouldn't fucking try because it's really hard and it's a bad idea. So, that's true. But yes. I'm trying to tell you that when you then say, if I don't eat Cheetos, it also makes the world better, good, better, best, bad, worser, and worst. Not worser. It's a joke. I'm making some jokes. These are the value judgments on that. The fact that the Cheeto will give you cholesterol or whatever Cheetos do to you, that is an objective fact. Okay? The value judgment would be, it is good or bad that I feel good or bad about the cholesterol in my blood because of the Cheeto. That's the value. I am in no way trying to I would not argue with you that the objective world does give you feedback. In fact, I agreed with you vehemently by saying that if you gravity will only judge you once, and then you were like, well, what if you jump off a 5-foot cliff? I'm like, okay, great. That's useful. But yeah, which I understand, because that is actually how most of us live in the world, is we make a bunch of small mistakes over and over again, and then it judges you. But anyway,
So
I
your
reject
point
your
is
collectivist.
the value,
I reject.
the value judgment. Is that where you draw the line? Is that you say that I'm wrong essentially for trying to conflate the natural world's feedback that's more like objective or whatever with ideas like better for people, good for you? Is that where you kind of lose me?
I understand what you're saying, and I even agree with it. I think it's the proper way for most human beings to live, and I endorse it for most people. What I'm trying to say is that if we're talking about this idea of the reevaluation of all morality and values, you have to be very careful how you speak about that, because everyone will tend to fall back into the language of using values to explain what that is. And that isn't... Look, one of Nietzsche's next books was called Beyond Good and Evil. Do you understand? It wasn't a different good and evil. Yeah. It wasn't the same good and evil, but I switched it around a little bit. This is done. There is no more of that, and that is the perspectivist view, the radical, in some ways, the radical moral relativism. Even though we could argue that also, but that if someone at its biggest extent, the individual takes on a reevaluation of all values, and then you were saying, well, but aren't they bad? You're like, isn't the totalitarian leader bad? And I'm like, in his eyes, he's not.
Listen. Okay, so this is what I mean. I think that there's a place here where we have to use language, and we fall back on terms like good and bad to indicate to each other what we're trying to assess things as, okay? As something you should or should not pursue. Maybe is more the functional language that contains a little less of the charged value statements like good or bad. But when I understand the concept of moving beyond good and evil, right? Because in some ways, that conversation is better aimed to deal with where people are now, which is kind of everything is very much filtered through the view of morality, right? We're constantly condemning each other. Oh, it's evil to use this word. This system is evil. It's good to have this belief. It's good to be of this identity or whatever. Everything I see, for the most part, the conversations that are on the larger cultural discourse are actually hyper-moral. Everything is filtered through good and evil, right? So the culture itself right now is not at all beyond good and evil. It's still clinging to morality as a way to understand the world. Now, what I'm trying to get at is that there is, how can I say this? I think that there is a way to do that assessment, right? Where you decide what rules you're going to apply to yourself to live in the world. Because that's the strange thing about living in a civilization, is that we're no longer very close to the immediate feedback of the natural world. And there is no morality in nature. There is no thing of, oh, don't eat the babies because that's wrong, because they're vulnerable. It's very much amoral. But there is still a system, right, that provides feedback on what is a preferred route for the organism and their species and a less preferred route for the organism and their species. And so in a way, I guess maybe I'm conflating the idea of what enables your survival, enables your evolution, enables the species growth and preservation as good. And it's almost a kind of return to that, like, what if we could take the natural world feedback, which we know works, okay? That's the problem with using society's moral structures, is that there's this gap. There's this kind of like disconnection where we're kind of making hypotheses about what is good and what is going to help us. But it doesn't have that immediate feedback of nature where it's, oop, wrong, you got killed. You know?
Oh, yeah. So here's what I would, this speculation. I say, all I do on this podcast is say things that may be or may not be true. I don't make a lot of claims that are 100%. But here's the thing. Okay. So the amorality of nature is useful to us as individuals when we talk about things like, should I eat nachos or not? Good, great. But I think that if we looked and peered down deep into history and time, and we really looked at how horrifyingly brutal the logic is of survival, I don't even think that's a capability of most human beings to fully fathom and function in society, and I don't think they should. Because nature's logic when it comes to scarce resources, again, gets...
Eat your kids.
That's your horror movie.
Animals eat their babies. Literally, like, that's something they do.
Don't do it. Civilized society does not endorse doing that. Anyway, here's the thing, though, what I'm saying. So, and when you say, I eat the Cheeto and that makes me feel bad, okay? That is feedback from the natural world. But then what is actually happening in your mind is a moral judgment about, I don't like to feel bad. And that may be related somewhat to your survival and ability to propagate your genetic line or whatever, but it's actually really more nested in this idea of, if I feel bad, I won't sleep as well, and then I can't wake up and go to my job at the AT&T call center. And I should be a productive, economic human being, and that's the thing I need to do, and blah, 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 because it's nested in all these...
But kind of like a good thing, though, to be a productive part of your society?
I would say yes. I'm a very centrist, mild person.
Kind of practical, pragmatic element to it.
I'm not talking about it being good, but all I'm pointing out is that you say, but isn't that good? And yeah, I agree, but I understand that is based on a value judgment. That's all. It's just the understanding that I think that that's better than not. That's all. But that's a very different logic. Mm-hmm.
Is it a value judgment to say a species should want to survive? Like,
of course, it is.
So every animal's inherent desire to survive is them making value judgments? No. Because every animal pretty much, I mean, I don't know. If there are exceptions, they're extremely notable. But animals have, which is kind of an interesting Schopenhauer idea. The will... I think he says the will to survive, right? Or the will to life. The will to life, that's what it is. And it's this idea that each organism has this almost ingrained desire for survival. So do they make a value judgment that survival is better? Is that a value judgment being made? No. That's nature. And in the normal course of things, that's just the way things go. But to say that is how anything actually works isn't true, because that wouldn't explain suicide in the human animal at all, would it? Because then that would be completely outside of the realm of... We wouldn't even be able to conceptualize that as a possibility. Here's the problem is that, like, when you get into this evolutionary, perspective, you start to look at, okay, there's all these things. Animals get sick, and animals do. When they get sick, they go off and they don't eat. Like, animals don't always have the will to survive. And this is, of course, a signal that there's something wrong. So
no, that's not true. Salamanders don't shoot themselves in the head. That's not what happens, right? And maybe
Jesus Christ.
And what? I mean, I'm just saying.
They don't. Obviously, right? When humans do stuff, it's all going to be. Look, I think what makes us as a species so have so much trouble with all our trying to, all the things in society that we try to do, that we try to decide what is good, what's bad, what's wrong, is that we in a way live in our own world, because civilization very much places all these barriers between us and nature. You get sick now, and you don't actually entirely pay the consequences of illness anymore. You can be around massive crowd. I mean, once upon a time, now you get sick, whatever, with COVID, but there was a time where just having sex once held a massive risk of death. Childbirth once held a massive risk of death. In some cases, these things still do, but the more robust and evolved a civilization becomes, the more it is able to erect these barriers between what nature's consequence would be and then what we place as a consequence, which is, well, you're going to get sick, but here you can take this medicine, and that mode of living, whether it was, accidental, whatever it was. I mean, nature doesn't make much allowance for, oh, I was naive, or, oh, it was a crime, or, oh, someone did something to me. Like, it doesn't matter. The animal that gets into a situation where they're harmed has a fairly immediate consequence. And it is that they're taken out of the gene pool. So I think, in a way, that's you're moving around and it distracted me. I lost my train.
Yeah, that's fine. Schopenhauer, by the way, I don't think he was a big proponent of not offing yourself. Wasn't his basically the idea was, and I haven't really gotten into him yet. I've been studying Nietzsche a lot, and I need to go back to him to understand how Nietzsche evolved in his early works. But my understanding is basically he was like, you pretty much should just like there's really no point, but art kind of at least entrances enough to basically live through life somewhat, but there's no point. He was very nihilistic. He was way more nihilistic than Nietzsche, and he was almost Eastern in his outlook of a kind of Buddhist renunciation of life. But anyway, we've really, and it's enjoyable, it's great, and all that. We've really got away from the individual.
Let's
Can we
go
just
back.
say,
Let's go back.
we'll go back, but no, I need to say something. So
on.
I would just like to conclude my part on this idea of the individual and community, or whatever it is, individual versus groups. I can't even think of the word. That's how foreign it is to me. I would like to say, number one, I reject it. Okay. And also USA, free Cuba for that. Yeah. Okay. And then also nothing that I have said I don't want anything that I have said to induce any sort of fragile salamanders in our audience to self-harm.
That's right.
Go ahead.
We will add a trigger warning for the salamanders because
it is dark, though. It is dark.
Graphic.
I try to be. Look, I mean, I can sometimes be
Salamander Suicide sounds like a metal band too.
I really
got Salamander Suicide and Proto Shark.
I think that I tone myself down a few notches while we're recording. I do that for everybody's benefit, including my own.
Public service, yeah.
I do.
All right, anyway. Are you done there? Anyway,
yeah,
the point is that we were trying to say is that, what the original idea was, why does the weaker person latch onto the stronger person? And my point was that, there is, what is to be an individual? What is to be an individual but to make assessments on the way you will live in the world individually? So, it does require a lot of that. And of course, there is the Nietzsche's idea that most people cannot do that. But that's why I think there's degrees of that. Like, you don't have to be a martyr or something, There is a way to just say, well, I have enough of a defined value system that I know when it's time to step away from the group. That may be one of the more solid things that every person can hold on to in trying to develop individuality.
I would like to name your idea. I would like to name your concept right now, live on air.
That's not how it works.
I'm going to do it, though.
Works. The person that designs the idea gets to make it.
Well, I'll give you an idea for it. So Nietzsche had the Übermensch, right? The Superman, the bad translation, Overman. And then I think that in German, maybe one might say the Untermensch or something like that. Isn't that the Underman? Is the no good? I think that your concept is the Mittermensch, the middleman. I think that you're just...
No!
Yeah, it's the middleman. It's like, I'll have a Cheeto here and there, but I also won't,
won't become a god.
I won't reevaluate all morals. Well, we're going to get into this if this podcast lasts. We're going to get deeply in to a lot of these issues with Nietzsche and all that. I demand it. I will do it.
The Mitterman sounds kind of like a stand for the middle class. And I am a proponent of the middle class who are shrinking. This is an emergency that no one cares about anymore. Bring back the Mitterman. Okay, let's go on to Fromm's concept of losing the pseudo-self. So here we're going back to the groups, okay? So this is the problem with groups. So many problems with groups. So Fromm,
can you tell us who
Eric
Fromm is? Yes, thank you.
I am going to do that. Eric Fromm is I believe he was a psychoanalyst, a little bit after Freud. And he's written a lot of books. They're really good. Escape from Freedom is the one that is primarily related to Fight Club and the idea of the individual as stuck between kind of negative and positive freedom is what he defines it as, which is negative freedom is you are free from the tyranny of a king or groups and whatnot. But positive freedom is you are free to become what you would like to become, to pursue what you would like to pursue. And his theory is that right now, and I think I agree with this, I think this is more evident now than when he wrote about it, is that, okay, so the US is this individualist country, right? But the paths to individuality have been degraded. You know, they're not being upkept. In many ways, they're being closed down as people become more saddled with debt and everyday life becomes more expensive. The path to that metaman, where people become a kind of, doable individual, not the fucking, artist of the century or Jesus or whatnot, but an individual that knows when to step away from the group and has enough of that positive freedom to develop themselves in an interesting way. Because that's really what it is. That's really what it is. I think that's one of the most beautiful articulations of freedom, and it comes from me, is that you want to figure out who you are. Okay, there's a little maybe threshold, right? Where you're, okay, I'm developing. But if you don't cross that threshold, I would say it is the threshold where the metaman is at. Once you cross that threshold, now you are unique. You're starting to figure out what makes you different from everyone else. And that may be what it is that you create, your personality, all these different things, So that's kind of what the goal of a positive, doable individuality is. Now, from his idea is that when people recede from that, okay, so they fail to become an individual, they become a pseudo-self. So there's the true self, which touches on that idea. I think it was Emerson. Yeah, Emerson, the essay of self-reliance, which people can learn more about that in Library Circus 3 or in the Truman Show episode, How to Be a True Man. So this is that same idea of becoming an authentic self. When you don't do that, you become a pseudo-self. And the pseudo-self is a kind of personality that is dictated by the culture or the group that you ally yourself with. And that's a very dangerous thing, because when you have a mass of people that start to mold themselves based on the whims of a group or a government, that's how you have the birth of authoritarianism, where everybody, and people always say this, like, why did everybody go along with it? Well, because they were all having their identities, their interests, their beliefs dictated by a larger entity. And individuality is the most powerful tool I see for preventing that phenomena where everybody goes along with a perverse group ideology.
I endorse it for a variety of reasons. And also I was just trying to do some freestyle etymology while you were talking to make sure that, because I was like, I made up a word in German. I don't speak German. I wanted to make sure I didn't accidentally make up some word that was like the Nazis used. Give me something
shitty, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't want to be like, and then we're just talking like using this German word. We don't know that we're accidentally using that.
No.
And I was like, okay, that wouldn't be great. So as far as I can tell, no. But apparently Mietmensch means fellow man. Fellow man. That may be messed up.
It might be something not great, yeah.
Please, I generally, you can trust my word of the podcast, my etymology. This is freestyle and it's with the language. I don't know. So anyway, the other thing I wanted to say is I think the other reason I agree with the idea of people becoming slightly an individual but not too much is because insofar as that stabilizes the society and the system, that benefits me because I think that your apocalypse is boring. I don't want to go through a revolution because it's going to be fucking boring. Because I already know what revolutions are like because I read about them. And it's just going to be a bunch of morons like burning things down and like killing each other. And I just, for my own sake, I like the idea of a robust middle class of those values in a completely selfish way because I have no desire to live through a revolution or whatever that would be. And again, I think we're going to talk about this briefly in this movie. I don't actually think anyone wants that. I don't think anyone really... There are some people who are maybe so completely, really nihilistic in some ways, or sociopaths, or maybe just so grabbed and held by ideology because that's replaced something else in their life. Maybe there are people that are truly that possessed by that. I'm using the language of Jordan Peterson a little bit and speaking about that. That they would want it. But my feeling is that I really just, and we talk about this a lot, that I have this belief that people don't actually understand what the horror of life can get to. And you need to read history to understand how bad it can get. And that it's going to give you just a glimpse into how bad things can get. And then if you're a reasonably sane person, you try to say no to that and at any possible way you can. I just don't think we know the depths.
No.
We haven't recently.
Well, I mean,
not in America, not in most of Western Europe for a good long time.
No.
And it
because
really
here's
makes
the
me
thing.
upset. It upsets me when people, they play with it. It's like they play with revolution. They play with violence. They play, and they do it through language primarily. They do it occasionally. They act it out in the street in these little fist fights and stuff. But they're playing with it, and there's something very disrespectful. I feel like you should respect the horror of mass violence enough to keep your mouth shut. That's all. Like, again, I get a little vehement about that, but I've read too much history. It's
a good
bothered
thing to
me.
get vehement on.
It's bothered me. I've read things that have stuck with me and
Well, it's a specter.
Yeah,
it's like a thing that follows you. Having that. That's the thing about when you learn about history, and it's what really bothers me is that I mean, and a lot of times you have people that use the language of revolution and radicalism. They will look at Cuba and say, "Oh, well, it's the U.S.'s fault." Well, what the fuck are you talking about? Look good at it. Because right now, the people that are the people that have nothing, that are trying to uprise for basic freedoms, they're not getting shot in the back by the U.S. They're getting shot by their own communist dictatorship. So it's very important not to be so naive and so shifty and so sneaky about how you protect your ego that you ignore what's right in front of your face. Because I mean, that's again, this is just to touch back on my little theory, is that. That's that problem when you get divorced from the reality of the world. And an ideology can do that to you. And I think communism is one of the most perverse ideologies that does that. Because it sells people something that they desperately want to believe, which is, in just the right situation, we would all be angels. In just the right system, we would all live in utopia. No, there is a reason that every religion for the world has left that for a place that no person can reach until after death. The utopia does not exist on Earth. Earth is on Earth. So it's almost, there's almost a weird biblical-esque punishment for the idea of, oh, well, I'm going to create utopia on Earth. You get punished for that type of arrogance. And the punishment is what? This famine, brutality, repression, mass death. It's horrible. The horrible things that you have to be honest and look at it and not be so arrogant and say, oh, but if I did it, if we just tried it one more time. And that's what the U.S. is in so much danger of, is that we are, and I think this is the danger of the empire in decline situation, where you're getting to be just at the right level of where people are getting, there's real problems. That's when you get into a situation that's more sticky, when people can really point to some real problems, which is, oh, we have massive debt. Look at the corruption that's so obvious in the government. Look at the violence, that is getting blown up by the mass media. Every chance they get, they stoke the flames because that's out of control. So you're getting this little whirlwind of all the perfect problems that can stir people up, and that sense of emptiness that is part of Fight Club. That sense of, well, what else is there? Well, fuck, you live in closest thing to utopia that exists on the earth, and you're so dissatisfied, you say, well, what else is there? And that's where we come to that idea of, I want to destroy something beautiful. There is this kind of release in destruction. And I do think that you're right, that there is, and I think you're being too generous, I think that people are more attracted to destruction for a sense of meaning than your argument relays. I don't think they know it, though. I don't think it's a commitment to it. I think it's a flirtation. And that flirtation is dangerous in itself.
All right. So I didn't get to, I think you cut me off from doing my recitation of the poem by John Donne, which was
No, we're
meant
not there
to.
yet. We're not there.
I thought we were talking about destruction of stuff. I thought that's after.
Hold on. Well, we haven't done the whole boot camp psychology that you see in Fight Club, because this whole thing is like they break people down. You don't have a name. They're like wearing black bloc. They're like kind of pushed to the edge and like roasted and whatever as a way to test allegiance and to test how willing someone is to debase themselves for the group. That's actually an interesting little idea. There is you see that in Fight Club where they're like, you're too short, you're too fat. And so the ones that go away, we don't want those because look how easily our abuse turns them away. Now, there is something sick in a kind of political ideology that does that says, how much abuse are you willing to take for us? Because, of course, what does that do? That makes you the most perfect servant of an ideology when you're willing to take so much abuse in its name. So this is an interesting element because it's almost... I saw a little bit of a kind of like this Eastern idea of no ego, no self, where you merge into the group. But it's, again, perverse because as opposed to the idea of no ego, no self in service of something higher, right? In service of some God where you meditate for hours or you put yourself at the feet of some ideal, an ideal. That's what a religion is. It's an ideal. The God is an ideal. A group of humans is not an ideal. It cannot be. It's like worshiping a false idol, It's human beings. They are inherently flawed, especially if it's a political system. You're going to worship a human-created ideal, you're going to be punished for that flaw. Like that is a kind of worship of a false idol, I think.
But this is what Nietzsche warned about when he said that God is dead. He was saying you're not what's coming. Once essentially the Judeo-Christian framework breaks down in Western civilization, you're going to be forced to create new values to some degree. And it doesn't happen all at once in his view. And this is separate from the idea of the reevaluation of morals within the individual to be free as an artist and an individual. It's different. He was saying this is going to happen to societies. And then what's going to happen is, to him, I think anarchy was a little bit more rocking out at that point in Russia. But and Dostoevsky was looking at the same thing. Anarchy, socialism, fascism, whatever it's going to be, there's going to be these new things that are going to provide you the meaning that you lack because
also saw this.
Yeah, of course. Well, these people, Nietzsche, they didn't live through it. That's history. It doesn't matter. But yeah, so they saw that. Now, in terms of the actual methods, the movie does so many different things, and it does show you in this point of the movie essentially a little bit of how cults work, of that idea of getting rid of people's identity and all that, and then it culminating in the fact that no one has a name until they're dead in the film, which was, it's really good. And
there's...
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. And there's one thing, you had brought up Jordan Peterson, like his language in regards to whatever it was you were saying. But there's actually another element of his work that I see in this movie. And it's interesting because this movie really gets denigrated as being like, it's for disaffected white men, which is also the criticism levied against Jordan Peterson, which is, his work is just for disaffected white men, which is like, isn't that the problem that everybody keeps pointing at? Is like, these disaffected white men. Okay, well then why don't we want people that are trying to reach out to them? Hello? Of course, then you can go watch the Joker podcast for the answer to that question, which is essentially that people prefer their scapegoat than a solution. But there's a scene in Fight Club, which is it was so uncanny. I couldn't believe it. That synchronicity again, where Edward Norton says at the beginning, once the cult, the group is starting to develop, he said, Fight Club became the reason to cut your hair short and trim your nails. And so it's this idea, there's a very similar ethos in that statement to the idea of clean your room, right? Which is these very basic things. And the question behind this idea of clean your room, people make fun of this. Okay, clean your room. Oh yeah, whatever. The question I think that Jordan Peterson gets to, and this movie also touches on, is why? Why should I trim my hair? Why should I cut my nails? Why should I clean my room? Why? What's the point? And that's nihilism. So that's what this movie also deals with, is you have people that are struggling with this nihilism, with this question of why. Why do these basic things? Why even take care of myself? And what is scary about this movie is that it shows you what happens when you get the wrong answer. What happens when Fight Club becomes your answer for taking care of yourself.
It's a good point. Well said. And it does lend a little bit more credence to your idea of this kind of using the objective world as a useful feedback loop and how to take care of yourself. And again, I'm not trying to bring that idea down. I wasn't. I was trying to, but I was trying to make sure that people understand that's very separate from this other concept of completely wiping out and restarting the reevaluation of morals. That's all I was trying to say. Well,
time for your poem.
Why I was trying to remember why because you were talking about the individual and you were talking about groups and all this, and so many people often use this phrase, no man is an island. No man is no ubermensch is an island. I'm going to rewrite it. No man is an island to himself. That's what I always thought it was said, but it doesn't. I looked it up anyway. It's John Donne. I don't have enough caffeine. Let me get a little.
Okay, get out of here. I'll read it.
No,
you want me to read it?
You're not going to read it. I'm going to read it.
I'm going to read my poem.
I'm going to read my damn poem. Let me get a little tea in my face.
No mensch is an island. I like that one better.
No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. And so then I was smoking and reading this on the porch, and I thought to myself, no man is an island. However, you can be a highly fortified peninsula with a harbor that you have mined and that you have set up, multiple strategic checkpoints for. I'm not trying to rewrite John Donne. I'm just saying that, maybe technically you can't be an island, but you still provide security for the individual.
A highly guarded peninsula.
Okay, so and then there's another.
Read the whole poem correctly from the beginning. Just read it all.
I'm trying to give you.
Or do you want me to read it in my nice, articulate, feminine voice?
I've already told you no. So do I have to tell you no twice? If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less. A little Eurocentric, John Donne. As well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thy friends or of thine own were. All right. And then I wrote underneath this, John Donne was against global warming. John Donne was against global warming. I had to spend an hour sorting out your internet.
You're a clod washed away by the sea.
I had to spend an hour sorting out your internet for you.
Well, I'm sorry, basic IT work makes you, washes you away.
If you had to just listen to the instructions to fix the problem, then I would be able to
Well, that's why there's an entire IT industry, is that no one follows instructions. So
any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never sin to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Now, here's the thing that was
for
really
whom the bell tolls.
And that's
you gotta.
And that was really great because you know what? I never knew. I knew that line.
Yes.
From Metallica song, granted, but also because it's an Ernest Hemingway novel. Yeah. Oh, well, you're more the dirt rock. You're more the dirt rock culture of Metallica, and I'm more the literature. That's fine. It's okay. I don't judge you. But I never knew that was part of the same poem that had "No man is an island entire of itself." I did not know that, and so I have learned something today. I did. You're just not going to let me. You're not going to let me get a word in edgewise. You're trying to kill poetry. You won't allow me to just fucking talk about John Donne for 2 minutes. You got to start screaming Metallica lyrics out with your right ring.
Cuba Libre! It's my right. That's the thing that people don't understand, is that when Cubans are free of communism, they never shut up. All right,
they don't shut up when they have communism. I lived in Miami 5 years. I've known you a very long time. Like,
there's nothing you can do with our people.
It doesn't matter what system of government you're gonna have. Cubans are gonna make their voice heard.
It is true, and very loudly, might I add.
I think it's great.
Now, here's the thing about your poem.
Not mine.
For whom the bell tolls. You're right. For John Donne, Someone actually sent me this poem a little while ago. The context is Rush Limbaugh's death. And I thought it would be apt to bring that in because...
Good, but they're right. They're right. Don't.
No,
they're
right.
Yeah, the last sentence. Don't be all against Rush Limbaugh because
it tolls for thee too.
It does, yeah.
It's going to toll. And so this is the thing is that I was saying, it's a little ugly. It's a little peasant-like, and we've spoken about this before, that it's a little peasant-like to be like, ding dong, the witches, that every time a conservative you don't like dies, because it's like, dude, there's like 50,000 that were just born. This is not, it's human beings. It's not Rush Limbaugh. It's not like you were under the boot of Rush Limbaugh this entire time. He's just an asshole that talks. And if
people did that on the left. People did that to the left also, to be fair. They did it with the Supreme Court
ugly.
Ginsburg, the Rush Ginsburg, not Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
No,
yeah, there are people on the right who are like, oh, I'm glad she's dead, Rush Bader Ginsburg.
It's ugly.
No, it is ugly. It's unfortunate.
It's ugly every time. And John Donne will tell you the fuck why. Because the bell tolls for you, my friend. The bell tolls for us all. And there's something there. God bless John Donne. There's a little bit of an Eastern element to this poem, if I may say so myself, because it's this idea of unity. And almost of this idea that we all go to the same place, that there's something about
I reject
there's something connected. What? Death? Unity?
All those things, yes. But yeah, I reject it.
I mean, yeah.
I said I was going to reject a lot of things.
You can be unified and alone. Like, I can still recognize the divinity in each individual human being and recognize that I am part of this human world while staying in my house alone, miles and miles into the wilderness, as I will love to be. And I'm still a human being.
I can accept
Rush
that.
Limbaugh could be in the mountains. Rush Limbaugh could be on the beaches. Rush Limbaugh could be anywhere. That's the thing that people don't understand. Like, it's not like he grows in a particular area of Earth and it's like, oh, finally we got rid of him. It's a human being. It's just a human being, and it's going to keep happening. So, I mean, you can party all you want when Rush Limbaugh dies, but, get ready to have a funeral when the 50,000 Rush Limbaughs are born. I don't understand it. It's peasant shit. Anyway, go explain your part of the poem that you like.
I don't even particularly like the poem that much. I just thought that it was...
I love the poem. I mean, the Metallica
that's good. I like
excellent.
it too. I it's not one of my favorite Metallica songs, but
it's actually a pretty good one.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, they use the bell sound.
The bell tone. I just love that guy's
use the bell.
voice.
The bell
That's
sound
right.
effect.
They use the bell. That's
they
right.
do.
Which is very easy to go astray with, but Metallica does it.
So no, but it is a good poem. I didn't know. I don't spend all my days just reading poetry, But
oh no,
not all my days. No, I don't. But it always bothered me.
What's the name of your autobiography?
What's the name of it? The Peninsula.
Reading poetry on my peninsula.
So this is something that I've thought for a long time, and I have struggled with this line from John Donne: "No man is an island unto himself." I rephrased it, but because I have been very individualistic all my life, and I've always been like, I kind of want to be an island. Like, can I not?
I'm trying.
And then I was like, well, if you can't be an island, I always can't with this little joke in my mind of, well, I can be a fortified peninsula. So I also just assumed that For Whom the Bell Tolls was that line was Shakespeare, because everything that's old that I don't really quite know that's in English literature, I'm just like, that sounds like Shakespeare said it. So anyway, I'm the fool. Good job, John Donne. Job well done. It's getting bad, man.
Well done.
John, well done,
I did
John. Thank you. Yeah, you did it well.
No, let it be. I did it right.
You did.
Let's
let
move
it be.
on.
Okay, it's got to be fast. I'm running out of the caffeine.
Okay, silence. How about that? It'll be faster.
Sounds
silence.
Yeah. No totalitarian impulse here.
Well, this is why I can argue against it, because I know it well. Sweat and silence, as we said in the last, in the Full Metal Jacket one. That was a good line. I got to sell that one to the capitalists. Or just Apple. Apple will take it.
Well, they may have it written on the walls in Chinese of their factories. It would be my guess. They probably already have that trademarked, so you might want to check that out.
Yeah, I might need to censor myself before I get sued by them. That's our trademark for oppressing the people. Okay, desire for destruction is a big deal in Fight Club, obviously. People are getting destructed. They're destructing, and they are destroying each other. So the narrator, there's something interesting in this movie, besides the obviously, destroying each other's bodies. The narrator has these fantasies of chaos in the form of accidents. There's a really particularly brutal one where it's he imagines the plane going down. It's a good one. It's a good scene. And I thought about that because I do that enough, but it's not the same. It's not the same. Mine is just anxiety. Mine is just like, what if what if something bad happens? His was more like this sense of that flirtation again, that kind of desire for it, that kind of desire for chaos. And of course that you see that when he beats up Jared Leto. I like that we use the names of the people instead because it just sounds like the actors are beating the shit out of each other. And he says as he punched Jared Leto in the face, till he had no face. They really did a number on him too with the monster makeup on him later. That's a little unrealistic. I mean, they gave him, what the fuck is that? Like a prosthetic face? Fine, whatever. Pretty grotesque. So when Edward Norton destroys Jared Leto's face, he says, I wanted to destroy something beautiful. Now there's something interesting that's a kind of parallel with a Freudian concept here that I'm not extremely familiar with. I'm not going to pretend like I'm a Freudian expert. I'm not. But I just want to talk about this because it's so related. And so people will have heard the death drive or the death instinct. And this is something that Freud added later to his theory, which originally it was kind of like that stereotypical Freud where he believed that everything just came down to the libido, the sex impulse. But then how do you explain that there is sometimes this pull that human beings have towards self-destruction, toward harm? And that is what he theorized was the death drive. And so the death drive, to quote Freud, he says, the goal of all life is death. And I love that because it's super goth. Like Freud was so goth. The goal of all life is death. Super interesting. And this also has an interesting parallel to one of the lines that are really famous from both the book that Chuck Palahniuk wrote and the movie, which is, on a long enough timeline, the survival rate for everyone drops to 0. So it's kind of this idea that the end game is always death. Freud's idea is that there's something that pulls the organism back to its original state, which is the state of non-existence. Now, that's, not so real. I don't know how legitimate that view is in psychology. Of course, when we talk about Freud and I talk about like Jungianism or things like this, or we've talked about on one of the library circus where there was like these therapeutic techniques where they tied down schizophrenics and you were like, I don't know if that's okay. And I don't think it is okay. Don't tie down schizophrenics unless they give you consent, which the people did. People are going to need to watch that episode for context. But the point is that you can look at these things without being like, this is a fact, and still learn something from it. See, what was the little nugget that makes this sound like it might be touching on something bigger, more true, And I think Freud's death instinct is a little bit that idea of what is it in the human being that breeds that desire for destruction.
I think that I read, it's Civilization and Its Discontents or something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah.
When I was very young.
That was after the Nazis. See, which is also when his death instinct theory came out, which is after he saw the Nazis, he was like, well, Jesus, I gotta amend this because clearly it's not only sex.
Yeah, that's why I was saying what I just said. But thanks for
I'm giving
filling
a
in.
little context.
Well, I'm literally responding to what you're saying. I'm saying this slowly. I'm saying I read that book a long time ago, and it's called Thanatos or something like that. Is the word he came up with it, right? So I'm just refining your idea a little bit, giving the people the information they need. I don't truck with it. I sometimes say, people say, do you like Freud, Sigmund Freud? I say, I don't hate him, but I don't truck with it. I like the Carl Jung. I like him. Prefer him to Freud.
Yeah.
But I read Sigmund Freud when I was probably too young. I read a lot of things when I was too young. And look how it worked out. But anyway,
Yep.
I don't have much to say to that. That doesn't make any sense to me. I know that he was watching. I thought it was World War I that he was watching when he came up with that, not World War II. But I could be wrong. And seeing all these people jump across the trenches is obviously going to their death pretty much, and that's where it came from that. But anyway, carry on. I have nothing really to add to that because I don't believe in it.
Okay, well, I think it's an interesting thing because there's that idea of the desire for destruction, and it's compelling to look at it from different angles because clearly there is something there that, yes?
I do have one more thing to add to it, and then I will silence myself. I think a lot on the porch, smoking, drinking tea. And people need to know. It's where a lot of my work is done.
Yeah. True.
The thing that I've criticized in part 1, I think, of Fight Club, our podcast here, was this adolescent attitude towards apocalypse and destruction. And what I was thinking today is that this kind of idea of like, I guess they want to get rid of the banking system to go back to hunter-gatherer times, that it's like the secular version of the enjoyment people find in the zombie movie. Because I think this maybe is, and I don't know the female mind as well as I know the male mind because I am a male. I think there's a very male, anyway, fantasy about returning to whether it's hunter-gatherer times in Fight Club or it's the zombie movies. People love those because all of a sudden now the rules are gone and you can kind of become something else, and people love to fantasize about that. Oh, I'd be really good at getting the zombies. I'd be really good at, stealing the canned food from Walmart and making my little post-apocalyptic zombie colony or whatever.
Bunker.
Yeah, but again, it's fantasy because you wouldn't be good. By definition, if there's 100 people thinking that and then it's the apocalypse, 99 of them are dead, so you weren't good at it. Most people aren't, and also it sucks. I'm not going to go off on a tangent. I just really think people should be grateful for a lot of things they have, and they should purposely put themselves in situations which are not dangerous to themselves in order to experience some hardship so that then they can enjoy the things they like, so that they don't think that they want to live in, whether it's hunter-gatherer times of Fight Club or a zombie apocalypse thing that everyone, it's like, oh, this is so great. It's not great. You don't want to live that way. And also, that's all I have to say about that, I guess. Don't do it.
Well, the other thing I've always noticed with like the kind of pull of the zombie stuff and the apocalypse in general, and it's the same thing with the desire for destruction. Like I want to go out and destroy stuff. And it's like, dude, come on, we're just trying to do stuff. Like get a fucking hobby. Go, there's so many ways that you can productively change society without destroying it. And this is what I think. Like, does Antifa want to destroy something beautiful? Is that what they look at when they see the U.S. government and they say, I want to punch the U.S. government until it has no face left, like Jared Leto? Is that what they're doing? They're trying to destroy something beautiful. And I think that there is something like that, because think of what happens in Fight Club, which is this idea of, we said this in, I think it was part 1, where you have everything that the world could offer. Of all the countries in the world, the U.S. is one of the best ones to live in. Sorry, it's true. Like, I mean, of the industrialized world, yeah, I guess it's better to live in like one of the smaller countries in Europe. But I mean, these are completely different countries also, so it's not that it's, I don't know. If you're making faces at me, it's going to distract me.
I purposely looked at the camera.
Would you like to say it out loud?
No. I wanted. It was a little joke because I edit the podcast. I looked at the camera and mouthed the words "it's not" when you said it's better to live in a small European country, and I was going to edit that in, but you fucked up the joke.
I can't read. Oh,
you can't read my mind. I understand.
I can't read your face either.
Good. That'll help me survive in the apocalypse. By the way, I'll interject briefly and then I'll let you go on. But I have no idea what anyone thinks. Anyone. I don't know it, and especially people we are calling Antifa or however you pronounce it. But I think that, and we'll talk about this when we do some zombie movies, which we inevitably will. it's not only this fantasy of the idea that people restart anew or whatever, and they want to do that. This survival fantasy, essentially, to give credit to people who are, I guess we'll say, revolutionaries of any stripe. I think there is another aspect of it, which is this desire for, in their minds, justice, and that the only way for justice is essentially to sweep the old system aside. So if we were being generous to people, whether it would be Antifa or some other revolutionary group, we would have to say there probably is a motivation theoretically in some of their minds. Melissa, I don't like to use specific groups.
Well, it's very hard because, I mean, here you go. Let's contrast right now, because we have the Cuban uprising, and then we have in the United States there these smaller groups, whatever their political affiliation is, that take to destructive means to try to get at their aims. And I mean, the people in Cuba would and have happily come to this country and live happily ever after. They are not in the streets trying to then destroy things because, oh, this place is so horrible, we cannot live like this. So you can see that there's already this kind of discrepancy between how a person can define what is worth destroying to start anew. And that's very interesting, because I think one of the best things that you can always do to assess, okay, is destruction the best answer, is to look and say, what am I aiming for? Does it even exist? If not, okay, am I aiming for perfection? Am I aiming for a utopia? Am I aiming for the 1% of the world? Is that worth destroying? I don't think so. I think when it comes to that it's better to use productive means, as opposed to let's just scrap everything and see what comes. Because again, here's the problem. Yes, there's an uprising in Cuba, but you have to remember that the uprising is in response to the brutality that came from an uprising. So there's no guarantee when you play that card of destruction to start anew from that it's going to beget something better. On the contrary, realistically, you should believe that it will beget something worse. Unless, again, you look at a system like Cuba's, where you have no freedom, no material resources, and no food or medicine. So yeah, at that point, you play the destruction card, you're more likely to be in a better situation. Maybe.
Right.
Still is. You might be in the same situation, just a different oppressor.
So I agree with you, but just to be contrarian, which is my nature, and to try to steel man the opposite of you, we might say, whether it's left-wing organizations in the United States or the Cuban people that are rising up against their government, or throughout history, any people that have risen up against Russian anarchists, whoever you want, what you would say is, they would say, you know, there is no gradualism possible. There is no way to affect the system through peaceful means. They would probably say something like that it's just simply impossible to actually modify this, my perceived injustice of the system. And so therefore there is no alternative but to try to completely, and you know, there probably has been a logic to that in many different scenarios, though it's very complicated, because you get, even in Russian history, you get czars who would be more liberal, and oftentimes it was those liberal changes which then invited more pushback, and we get into a cycle of revolution, counter-revolution. But anyway, that's too much, and I need to smoke a cigarette because it's been 2 hours, so I can't go into Russian history.
Let's just end we end when your cigarette cravings return. Let's just conclude to end with Fight Club. I like the last frame because it finishes with the creation of something new, which is that answer to the impulse of destruction. Just turn away from that, which is what the protagonist does. He says, I don't want this anymore. This isn't what I want. But it's too late now. That's the problem with things like that, is that you set things in motion and you can't easily just turn around and shift gears afterwards. So we watch the skyline fall, and yes, there is something beautiful about that, but it's not so beautiful in and of itself, because you know what makes that last scene so iconic? It's the couple standing, holding hands, watching that destruction. There's something really beautiful in the commentary on a relationship coming out of the ruins. Because I think the ending is more related to the personality than it is to society as a whole, although the idea of creation as the answer to society's ills is really what it is. Go fucking make art, Edward Norton. Like, just get a fucking hobby and do something productive. That's what he needed to do instead of sitting in his office and being like, I hate my life. Make something, do something. That's again this idea of the repressed life, the life that is unlived. And when a person is too afraid to create, which is what he was afraid of the relationship with Marla. He turned away from it. You destroy instead. And so at the end of the movie, when he's integrated that side of his personality that is more dominant and able to pursue what he is previously afraid of, he can create a relationship. And that's something beautiful there. It reminds me of this idea, when two people come together and they both have this baggage and this trauma, but they commit to trying to create something from the ruins of their history. Everybody comes to relationships with all this baggage, and it's almost like you're starting from these ruins, but you're trying to build something out of it. And that's how the movie ends. It's a beautiful ending. And that's why it's so iconic, because it's true.